Hi, my name's Peter. I'm with Transpring USA, and today we're going to go over an initial assembly process for your Transpring autofiller with the heating modifications. I'm going to introduce to you all the essential parts and pieces that you're going to be dealing with in assembling this machine, as well as showing you exactly how to assemble it the proper way, as well as calibrate and test it. So let's get started. So when you buy your Transpring autofiller with the provided heating modifications, you're going to get a number of accessories here that you need to put together, assemble in the correct order in the correct way, and then learn how each of those pieces fit together and how they work together in order to allow the machine to process heavy viscosity liquids and oils. So what I'm going to do here is give you a really quick breakdown of it, how each individual part how to identify each individual part and how to make it all work together and how they fit together before we actually dive into assembly. So the first thing that we're going to really take a look at here is the supply tank. Number one, this tank right here is going to be your hot water bath digital induction heater for the supply tank. As you can see, the supply tank simply fits right into this and gets caught right on these edges here. And after you've placed your supply tank into here, you're going to want to fill this pot that it sits inside of with water and or liquid. Now I suggest that you fill it with either propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin instead of water, because water is highly corrosive and it can create a discoloration, which you can obviously see here. But by filling it also with propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, you also prevent that medium from evaporating. Water evaporates relatively quickly, so you have to keep refilling it. So all you got to do to turn your heating unit on is press your on button. You'll hear it turn on. It has an internal fan to help cool it. But you'll see right here that it's adjusted right now for 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to convert it over to Celsius because the rest of the system is going to be functioning on Celsius. If you don't really like the metric system, don't worry. It's going to be very easy. You just got to get numbers to match up. Press the function button on the front of this heating unit to convert the numbers over to Celsius. And I'm going to raise my temperature here to 40 degrees Celsius because I think that's a pretty good temperature to start off with. You really want to keep your temperatures as low as possible to allow it to, your high viscosity liquids to start flowing through the machine. The way that this heating unit functions, if there's a warming signal on it, if that sign is blinking, that means that it's still heating up. When it goes solid and it stops blinking, that means that it has reached its target temperature of 40 degrees Celsius or whatever that you set the target temperature to be. You can then begin to put your material inside of this heating tank and allow it a few minutes. I suggest at least 5 to 10 minutes to heat up and start absorbing the heat that this heating chamber generates. That way your material will be nice and soft before it begins processing through the machine. Now as we take a closer look at the supply tank, I'm going to identify some of the major knobs, valves, regulators that you will be interacting with on it on a daily basis as you use this machine. So first and foremost, let's start off with the wing nuts. These wing nuts here, as you can see, they are to hold and secure down the top of the supply tank after you've already inserted your material inside. They just need to be hand tightened at opposing ends in order to tamp down the top. And when you're ready to remove your material, you're going to untighten them and let them flip down to the side like so in order to remove the top. Now if we take a look on the top itself, there's a number of gauges and valves here that you may not be familiar with. So let's go through each one and identify them. Starting out with the largest one here, this is the air pressure regulator valve. What this does is it accepts an incoming air hose into this hole right here from your compressor. What this does then is allow you to dial down the pressure that is coming from your compressor, which will very likely be at between 120 and 150 psi. So this gauge, you will notice, since it comes from China, is actually in metric units, which is kilograms per square centimeter, as opposed to psi. Don't worry about that. You can easily do the conversions via Google. Just do PSI to kg/cm in order to figure out what the equivalent place on the dial is for your particular PSI, but I recommend starting at 3 kg/cm, which is equivalent to approximately 50 PSI. Now, in order to use this dial, all you're going to have to do is, you'll see that there's a black knob that's sticking out the side of this dial. In order to adjust pressure up or down, you're just going to pull that knob out. You'll hear a click. To adjust pressure downward, you're going to turn it clockwise, or to adjust pressure upward, you can turn it counterclockwise. Once you've found the perfect pressure for your particular material, go ahead and push the knob in. It will create another click, locking into place the pressure that you've set. Now, right in front of this, you're going to see a red knob right here, and it'll have a little metal ring attached to it. This is something that you're never really going to have to use, but it's still very important to have, and it is a safety valve. At about 115 psi, or 8 kilograms per square centimeter, this will begin to release pressure from your tank in order to prevent it from becoming overpressurized. Again, this is not something that you're ever going to use, but if it does happen to need to get used, you're going to be very thankful that it's there. Lastly, we have this release valve right here. Now, this release valve is to completely depressurize your tank before you release any material, or before you take the top off and extracting material from it. The way that you're going to do that is by simply moving this release valve into its up position, which will therefore allow air to release from the tank, completely depressurizing it. Now we're going to move on to actually connecting the supply tank to the supply line and running that supply line over to the filling machine, so you can begin to start feeding material from the supply tank into your filling machine. So to begin the process of connecting your supply line to your supply tank and running it to the filling machine, you first need to correctly identify the supply line and then insert it into the supply tank and cut it to the correct length. Now, to insert your supply line and begin working with it and run it over from your supply tank over to the filling machine, there's going to be a 4-step process involved. First, you're going to take your supply line, which is this white, opaque, very hard, seemingly almost inflexible sort of line here, and you're going to straighten it. Then you're going to, number 2, insert it into the supply tank. Number 3, you're going to measure and cut it to length. And then number 4, you're going to insert it over into the filling machine injector needle here. So let's begin with step 1, which is straightening this supply line. The supply line, like I said, is made of a white opaque material. It's actually food grade PVC, and it comes in a very tightly wound like this when you receive it. Now, in order to begin working with it, you're going to want to kind of unwind it and straighten it out a bit. And the easy way to straighten it out is to take and get gloves on to do this, because really you don't want to wipe a lot of grease or whatever dirt may be on your hand on the hose as you're doing this. So you'll want to take it in your hand and basically bend the hose back using your hand and thumb against the actual curl that is developed into it as it was wound. What this will do as you pull it through here and bend it all the way is begin to straighten that curl out. And as you can see now, it kind of hangs pretty straight. As we do that all the way down here to the tip, after we've pretty much unwound, and it doesn't have to be perfect, this doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but you really want to get it just about as straight as you possibly can. You're going to now go and move on to step 2, which is inserting it into the top of your supply tank. Now, the top of your supply tank has a hole that is in the dead center of it. That is the hole that you are going to insert this hose into. Now, you're just going to insert the hose into that and just start pushing it down with a little bit of force, but do it slowly, because what you're searching for is for that hose to hit the bottom of the tank. And when it does, you're going to feel a little bit of pushback, and it's not going to actually insert itself very easily anymore. and mine has just about hit here. Now, once it's hit, you're going to measure exactly 3 feet from the top of this tank all the way over to the rest of this tube here and then cut it. 3 feet, I found, has been the optimal length in order to provide enough, the least amount of space and the least amount of run so that your pressure is effective over the entire run of the hose, but still allow enough slack so that your filling machine can move and have range. So this needs to have some slack to it. Now, our next step is going to be the installation and operation of the provided supply line heater, which actually consists of 2 items. Number 1 is this partially assembled foam insulation tube with heating straps pre-inserted into it. These heating straps and this insulation tube are going to fit over the supply line, thus allowing you to heat the entire supply line to a specified temperature, therefore accurately maintaining the viscosity of your material throughout the run of the supply line. This is all connected to the second item here, which is the black control box. This control box will connect to the heating straps that are coming out of this insulation tube and allow you to control by degree the temperature and thus the viscosity of the material that you are feeding through the machine. Now, before we connect to the black digital control box, it will be essential and easier if we simply fit this over our supply line beforehand. To do so, simply open up the slit in the foam tube and begin to insert it over your supply line. Making note that the heating straps that you see inside of this foam tube should be sitting on the underside of the supply line because heat rises. So as these heating straps heat up, you want them to heat up underneath the supply line so that the heat will rise up through the supply line instead of sitting on the top side of it where the heat would just rise up into the foam tube insulation here and really not do too much. So begin by just opening the slit here and having it facing up and just insert it over the supply line very slowly. And if you have done a good job of cutting your supply line to the recommended 3-foot length, you will find that this 3-foot foam insulation tube fits precisely across the run and will be a very tight fit across the entire supply line. When you are done, it should look like so. And you'll notice on this foam heating insulation tube that across that slit, you can actually peel off the adhesive backing that is provided on here and seal the foam insulation tube. I would actually recommend against that. The reason being is that you're not really going to increase the heat retention very much by sealing it up, but what you do is make it extremely hard for yourself to A, remove this foam tube should you need to, but then B, to open up and see your supply line and see if there's any air bubbles that have developed. If there's an air bubble in the line, it's going to greatly affect the accuracy of the machine. So by leaving this foam tube open in such a way so that it's closed, but you can easily open it back up to view your supply line and or remove it, you allow yourself the ability to view and see exactly what's going on and see if there's any sort of air bubbles in the line. Now, once this tube has been put in place and it is to the right length, all you need to do to hook it up into your black digital control box here is find the appropriate connectors at the end, and then just simply insert them into the ports at the very top of this black control box. Insert them in until they snap in place, and now we are ready to begin heating our supply line. To operate this black digital control box, it's a very, very simple process. To select your target temperature, which is the temperature that we want to bring your supply line to, again, I'd like to start with 40 degrees Celsius. So I'm simply going to press the up button here until I reach my desired temperature. And It is at 40 degrees Celsius now. Should you want to activate the heater, all you have to do is press the bottom two buttons, which is the setup and the enter button, at the exact same time. Once you do that, you will notice both green buttons on the bottom begin to light up, and your digital display will begin to show the actual temperature climbing up to your target temperature. Once your target temperature has been attained, this digital control box will monitor it hundreds of times per second in order to ensure that it never travels any more than 1% away from your target temperature, thus keeping the heat on your supply line extremely accurate, keeping your viscosity consistent, and thus keeping the accuracy of your machine very high and stable. So the first item that we're going to assemble on our actual filling machine here is the additional air regulator valve that you received separately with your machine that actually connects to the side of the machine. Now, this air regulator valve is an in port as well as an out port. And if you look closely at it, you'll see that it's very clearly labeled. There's an in right under the in port and an out right under the out port. You want the out port to connect to this orange hose that is coming out the back of the machine here. You want this in port to connect to the air hose that we will eventually be connecting to our air compressor, which will supply air pressure into this regulator valve. So to begin, look at the top of your air regulator valve here, right at the black knob that's on the top of it, and you'll see a collar that can be turned off of it. That you're going to completely unscrew the collar off, take it off, and then insert this air regulator valve from the bottom up into the bracket that's here to hold it, and then begin screwing the collar back down in place to hold it in place. Now that we have connected our air regulator valve completely to the side of our filling machine, what we're going to do is you're going to take that short orange hose, and sometimes it'll be clear, but for this one it's orange. There's a short hose that's coming out the back of your filling machine, and connect it to the out port on the back of this air regulator valve. To do that, all you're going to do is push the hose firmly into the port until it snaps into place. You'll feel a little click, and then just pull back slightly to ensure that it's firmly secured inside of that port. Once you've verified that, we can move on to the next phase of our assembly process here, which is going to be connecting our air compressor to the filling machine as well as the supply tank via the supplied air hose that you will receive with your filling machine. Now, when you see this air hose, you'll be able to identify it by a few key features. Number one, it'll either have orange or clear tubing to it. Two, it will have a quick connect coupler on the end of it, as well as a Y valve right after it that will basically split into two air hoses. Now, one of these air hoses is going to run directly into your filling machine. So we're going to go ahead and connect that air hose first. Again, all you're going to do is take that one air hose and plug it into the in port of your air regulator valve here. Press in firmly until you hear it click, then pull out slightly just to ensure that the fit is tight and secure. Now, we're going to take our other hose, open-ended part, from our Y valve and connect it here to the top of the air regulator valve on top of our supply tank. Again, press in firmly until you hear it click into place, pull out slightly to confirm that it is secure, and now we can move on to our final portion of assembly. So now that we've connected our air hose to both the supply tank air regulator valve as well as the filling machine's air regulator valve, we are going to connect the final end of it, which has this quick connect coupler onto it, into our air compressor. And it's very much a simple matter of just taking this connector and plugging it right into the coupler port at the very front of your air compressor. It snaps into place with a quick push in again pulled out very quickly just to check that it's securely mated. And once it's in and connected to your air compressor, you pretty much have a fully assembled system, save for one other piece. And that is our handheld controller. You're going to connect this to the front of your filling machine via a supplied communications cable. This communication cable has two ends on it and a coupler on each end, which is interchangeable. It doesn't matter which end you connect to your handheld controller or to the front COM port on the front of your filling machine. When you do though, just make sure that you connect it in the correct orientation and fully screw in the thumb screws at the very bottom of this connector in order to securely mate it to the handheld controller as well as the COM port to ensure it doesn't just pull out. Once this step has been done on both the handheld controller as well as the filling machine, you're going to hear it beep. And this handheld controller will then turn on and go to its home screen, which will present options 1 through 5. These options are what are going to allow you to calibrate the machine to your specific usage as well as program it to fill just about anything you want. We're going to cover all this in later videos, so stay tuned and subscribe to our channel as we add more videos about this filling machine and how to calibrate it, assemble it, and maintain it throughout its usage.